The night started with a strange feeling moving through Emma's chest, a soft tension she could not name, a whisper inside her heart reminding her that everything in her life was shifting even if she tried to pretend nothing was changing. She sat by the window of the small apartment she shared with her roommate Ethan, staring at the city lights of Seattle as if they could give her answers, but the lights only flickered back at her, cold and distant, while her emotions kept burning hotter and closer. Emma had moved into this apartment 2 months earlier when she transferred for her marketing job. She expected peace, a quiet place to think, a simple routine. Instead, she got Ethan, a guy with a warm smile, messy hair, and a strange way of moving through the world with both confidence and gentleness. He was one of those people who did not try to stand out but somehow always did, and that was exactly what bothered her now, because the more she tried to ignore him, the more she felt something unpredictable pulling her closer. The evening had been long, work had drained her, and she had returned home earlier than usual. Ethan had told her he would be out with friends until late, which meant she had the apartment to herself. She loved those rare hours, the quiet air, the steady hum of the heater, the chance to let her mind rest without worrying if Ethan could read her thoughts in her face. Emma walked toward the tiny kitchen, poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Her breath felt heavy, not from exhaustion but from something deeper, something she tried to keep buried. She closed her eyes, trying to clear her head, trying to remind herself that Ethan was just a roommate, a friend, someone she could not, should not fall for. But her heart was stubborn, and the more she denied it, the louder it beat, as if arguing with her. She shook her head and moved to the living room. Dropping onto the couch with a long exhale, she pulled her knees close, wrapped her arms around them, and stared at the blank television screen. Her mind was racing, not with memories but with feelings thick and unspoken. She knew she had to let them out somehow. She felt too full, too overwhelmed, too close to breaking into pieces that no one would be able to pick up. She stood, walked to her room, and closed the door behind her with a soft click. The room was warm, the lamp glowing softly on her nightstand. She took off her jacket, sat on the edge of the bed and let her head fall into her hands. A trembling breath escaped her, and she whispered to herself that everything was fine, that she was strong, that she could handle her emotions. But the moment she said it, she felt the lie in her voice. She needed a release, not physical, not intimate, but emotional, a moment to breathe out everything she had been holding in. So she moved to the center of the room and let the feelings come. She cried, not loudly but softly, the kind of crying that comes from a heart quietly breaking. She cried for her past, for her loneliness, for her fear of losing control. She cried because she felt something blooming inside her for someone who did not belong to her, someone she had no right to want, someone she lived with every day under the same roof. Her shoulders shook as she pressed her hands to her face, letting the tears fall freely. Her breaths were uneven, her chest rising and falling with every trembling inhale. She felt exposed, vulnerable, raw, as if she had peeled back every layer protecting her heart. She whispered Ethan's name without realizing it, the sound slipping out like a confession she had never meant to speak. But in that moment, Emma did not know that the front door had opened earlier than expected. She did not know that Ethan had returned because the night out had grown noisy and tiring, and he had wanted quiet instead. She did not know that he had walked past the living room and heard a soft, muffled cry coming from her room, a sound so delicate that it almost felt wrong to hear it. Ethan stood by her door, hesitating. His hand hovered near the doorknob as he listened, a deep frown pulling at his eyebrows. He had never heard Emma cry before. She was usually so strong, calm, self-controlled, like a steady flame that refused to flicker. The sound of her breaking shook him in a way he was not prepared for. But he also knew he could not walk away, not when she sounded like her heart was unraveling piece by piece. Inside the room, Emma leaned back, wiping her face, trying to calm down. Her breathing softened, but her eyes were still wet. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a tissue on the nightstand. She told herself she was fine now, that no one had seen her, that her secret feelings were still safe inside her chest. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered that she would never let these emotions ruin her life. And that was the exact moment the doorknob turned. Emma's eyes flew open, her heart jumping wildly as the door cracked open. At first she thought she imagined it, but the moment Ethan stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. She froze, her eyes wide, her hands still shaking. The room felt too small, too warm, too close. "Emma?" Ethan said softly, stepping inside without rushing, his voice calm yet heavy with concern. "I heard something. I thought you were hurt." Emma's face flushed hot with embarrassment, not because he saw anything inappropriate, but because she hated letting anyone see her vulnerable. Especially him. Especially when her emotions were tangled around him more than he would ever know. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and Ethan took another step forward before she could stop him. His eyes scanned her face, noticing the tears she had tried to wipe away, noticing the tremble in her breath, noticing everything she tried to hide. He did not speak, not at first, because he knew Emma was not someone you talked over. She was someone you listened to, someone you approached with care, like trying to touch a fragile piece of glass without breaking it. Emma looked away, her gaze falling to the floor as she whispered, "You weren't supposed to be home." Ethan's voice softened even more. "I know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." She shook her head quickly. "You didn't scare me, you just surprised me." But Ethan could hear the truth behind her shaking voice. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet in front of her, giving her space, not wanting to push her into a corner emotionally. She finally lifted her eyes toward him, and the moment their gazes met, something sharp and warm passed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. "I didn't know you were upset," he said quietly. "I didn't know you were carrying something like this." Emma swallowed hard, her throat tightening again. Her emotions were still close to the surface, and Ethan's gentle tone made them ripple dangerously. She shook her head again. "It's nothing," she whispered. "I just needed a moment." Ethan stepped closer, slow and careful, his expression full of genuine worry. "Emma, when someone cries alone in their room, it's never nothing." His words touched something deep inside her, something she had built walls around for years. She wanted to deny everything, hide everything, pretend everything was fine. But Ethan's presence made her feel seen, and that scared her more than anything else. She looked up at him again, her eyes shining wet, her breath soft and uneven. "I didn't want anyone to know." Ethan's voice lowered, warm and steady. "Sometimes it's okay to let someone know." Emma's heart felt like it skipped a beat. The room seemed to tighten around them, not with discomfort but with something tender and electric, something that made her chest feel too small for her feelings. She whispered, "Why are you being so kind to me?" Ethan did not look away, his eyes gentle but firm. "Because you matter?" Emma's breath caught, her heart trembling. She felt exposed in a way that frightened her and soothed her at the same time. She did not move when Ethan took one last step closer, standing right in front of her now, his presence warm and steady. He lifted a hand slowly, giving her a chance to pull back, but she didn't. She stayed still, waiting, unsure, breathless. His fingers brushed a tear from her cheek, a touch so light she barely felt it. But her entire heart reacted as if he had touched something far deeper inside her. Emma looked into his eyes. The question she did not want to ask caught between her lips. "Ethan, why did you come in?" Ethan exhaled softly, the truth slipping out before he could stop himself. "Because I couldn't just walk away when the person I care about is hurting." Her breath trembled, her chest tightening, the moment hanging between them like a fragile thread ready to break. And then, just when the air felt almost too heavy to breathe, Ethan whispered her name again, soft, careful, full of something she wasn't ready to face. That was when everything inside her heart shifted. And the night changed forever, and the story truly began. Ethan stood there with his hand still half raised as if he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to be. And Emma felt the air around them tighten again. Not in a dangerous way but in a way that made her chest throb with emotion she had been trying to bury for weeks. She wiped the last tear from her cheek, trying to pull herself together. But her hand still trembled because everything suddenly felt too real, too close, too honest, and she wasn't ready for any of it, not yet. She stepped back slightly, needing space even though part of her wanted the opposite. Ethan noticed and lowered his hand, but his eyes stayed steady on her face, not judging, not pushing, just watching her like he wanted to understand every unspoken word behind her tears. Emma looked away, trying to control her breath. She felt exposed, and that feeling made her heart beat too fast, her palms sweat. Her legs feel unsteady. "I didn't expect you to come in," she whispered, her voice thin but trying to sound normal. "I thought I had the apartment alone." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know, I wasn't trying to invade your space," he said softly. I heard you cry and I couldn't ignore it." Emma bit the inside of her lip, fighting the mix of gratitude and embarrassment swirling inside her chest. She wanted to thank him, but the words tangled on her tongue. Instead she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands as if the answers were hidden in her palms. Ethan walked over and sat on the floor across from her, leaving enough distance so she didn't feel cornered but close enough so she didn't feel alone. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Emma," he said, his voice low but steady, Talk to me, I don't need details, I just want to know what's going on inside your heart. The words pierced her, gentle but sharp, and she took a long breath, her thoughts tumbling everywhere. She wanted to lie, say she was fine, say she was tired, say it was just work stress, but something about Ethan's eyes made lying feel impossible. It wasn't because he forced honesty, it was because he offered safety, the kind she hadn't felt in years. I think I've been pretending too long, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Pretending I'm strong, pretending I don't feel things, pretending nothing affects me. She shook her head slowly. But it does, I'm tired of acting like it doesn't. Ethan watched her, his expression softening. You don't have to pretend with me, he said gently. Not here, not in this apartment, and not tonight. Emma's throat tightened again. But she didn't cry this time, instead she felt something else rising inside her, something warm and terrifying at the same time. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the concern in his eyes, the patience in his posture, the way he was holding back so he didn't overwhelm her. And she realized how rare that kind of presence was, how rare it was to be known without being pushed, to be seen without being judged. She whispered, I don't want to be a burden. Ethan shook his head immediately, his voice firmer now. You could never be a burden, not to me. Her heart stuttered in her chest, the words hitting her harder than she expected. She looked at him again, and for a moment the room felt still, as if everything had paused just to give her space to breathe. Ethan leaned back slightly, giving her room. Tell me what's hurting you, he said softly. Let me understand. Emma exhaled shakily, her fingers curling together. I think, she began slowly. I think I've been afraid of caring too much, she swallowed hard. Afraid of letting someone in? Ethan listened without interrupting, his eyes steady on hers. I came here to start over, Emma said, her voice gaining a little strength. I told myself I would focus on work, focus on myself, no distractions, no attachments. She shook her head, her breath unsteady. But life doesn't follow rules, and sometimes your heart gets involved even when your mind says no. Ethan's chest rose slowly as he took in her words, understanding the quiet storm behind them. Is that why you cried? He asked softly. Because you feel something and you don't know what to do with it. Emma froze, her heartbeat jumping painfully high in her chest. She didn't answer right away, she just stared at him, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. Ethan's question cut straight to the truth she had been running from, and for a moment she felt too exposed to even speak. Ethan's voice softened even more. Emma, you don't have to tell me everything, he said. But don't hide from yourself. Her breath trembled, her hands twisting together. She whispered, what if the thing I feel is wrong? Ethan leaned forward subtly, not enough to invade her space but enough to show he was listening with his whole attention. Feelings aren't wrong, he said quietly. They happen, they grow, they change, and sometimes they scare us, but they're never wrong. Emma's eyes softened, but she still looked conflicted. What if the timing is wrong? She murmured. What if everything is too complicated? Ethan thought for a moment, then said in a voice filled with calm certainty, then you take your time, you let things unfold slowly, you don't rush, you don't force, you just breathe. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly and she closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. Ethan watched her in silence, giving her space to process. He noticed the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers clutched each other too tightly, the way her breath kept stuttering every few seconds. He wanted to comfort her, but he also knew she needed to speak first. She needed to let her heart spill out before any healing could begin. She opened her eyes again, and when she looked at him, something in her expression had changed, a little softer, a little more open, like a window cracking just enough to let the breeze in. Ethan, she whispered, do you ever feel like your heart is trying to tell you something you're afraid to hear? Ethan gave a small smile, warm and honest. Every day, he said quietly. But I've learned that the things we fear the most are usually the things we need to face the most. Emma stared at him, her breath catching at the sincerity in his voice. She felt something shift inside her again, a soft pull, a nervous flutter, a weight lifting slowly. She didn't know where this moment was going, she didn't know if she was ready, but she also knew she couldn't go back to hiding, not anymore. She whispered, you make it sound easy. Ethan shook his head gently. Nothing about this is easy, he said. But it's real, and real things are worth facing. Their eyes held each other, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. Emma felt warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling both comforting and frightening. She wasn't sure what she was allowed to say or what she should say, but she knew she had to speak something before the moment slipped away. I didn't cry because I'm sad, she whispered, her voice trembling. I cried because I'm scared of how much I feel. Ethan's eyes softened even more, a warmth spreading across his face. "Emma," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're not alone in that." Her breath caught again, her heart pounding too hard. She didn't know if he meant what she thought he meant, or if she was imagining it, or if she was reading something that wasn't there. But the weight of his words pressed into her chest with undeniable emotion. Ethan stood slowly, then offered his hand, not to pull her up but to help her breathe, to remind her she wasn't standing in this moment alone. She hesitated before placing her hand in his, the warmth of his touch traveling up her arm like a quiet spark she had been trying to avoid for weeks. He didn't squeeze her hand. He just held it lightly, steady, grounding, human. "Emma," he said gently. "Whatever you're afraid of, we can figure it out." Her eyes glistened, not from sadness but from the overwhelming weight of feeling understood. She whispered, "Why are you doing this for me?" Ethan inhaled deeply, and when he answered, his voice was soft but sure. "Because I care," he said. "More than I probably should, but I do." Emma's breath stopped, her heart skipping painfully. She stared at him, frozen between fear and hope, shock and longing, uncertainty and something that felt dangerously close to relief. Her voice broke into a whisper. "Ethan, what are you saying?" Ethan looked at her with gentle honesty, his eyes steady and warm. "I'm saying you're not the only one who feels something," he murmured. "And you don't have to hide anymore." Emma's world tilted, her breath trembling as the moment wrapped around her like a fragile, overwhelming wave. And just as she began to open her mouth to speak, a loud knock echoed from the apartment's front door, breaking the silence, breaking the moment, and pulling both of them back into reality before either could say what their hearts were ready to confess. The knock on the door shook both Emma and Ethan back into themselves. The moment that had wrapped them in warmth and tension shattered instantly, leaving a strange emptiness in the air. Ethan let go of her hand gently, almost reluctantly, while Emma pulled back as if she needed to gather every piece of herself before she could breathe again. The knock came again, louder this time, and Ethan stood quickly, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to calm the confusion spreading across his face. "I'll check it," he said softly, giving her one last look before he stepped out of the room. Emma stayed seated on the bed, her heart racing, her mind spiraling. She felt like she had been pulled from one world to another in a single second, and now she was stuck somewhere in between. She heard Ethan's footsteps cross the apartment, heard the front door open, heard muffled voices, one of them unfamiliar, one of them Ethan's calm but slightly tense. She wiped her face quickly, straightened her hair, and tried to steady her breathing. The moment they had shared hung heavily around her, pressing against her chest like a secret she couldn't control. She tried to convince herself that she had imagined some of it, that the emotions between them were only in her head. But Ethan's words echoed in her mind, quiet but sharp. "You're not the only one who feels something." Her breath trembled again, and she shook her head, trying to focus, trying to stay grounded. Ethan returned a minute later, closing the door behind him. His expression was thoughtful, a bit distracted, and when he walked back to her room, he paused in the doorway as if unsure whether he should step inside again. "That was my friend Dylan," he said, leaning against the frame. "He left his jacket here earlier and came back for it." Emma nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered, but the words sounded far too small compared to everything swirling inside her chest. Ethan studied her quietly, his eyes soft but searching. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. "I didn't want that moment to end like that." Emma's breath caught, and she looked down at her hands, twisting them together nervously. "I don't know what that moment was," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I don't know what anything is right now." Ethan stepped inside slowly, closing the gap between them again, but not too close, not yet. "Then let's figure it out," he said, his voice calm and steady. "One step at a time." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and longing. "What if we ruin everything?" she whispered. "What if this changes the whole apartment, the whole friendship, everything?" Ethan shook his head softly. "Emma, something already changed the second you opened up to me," he said gently. "We can't pretend nothing shifted." Emma swallowed hard, her throat tightening again. "I don't want to break this," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you." Ethan moved a little closer, his voice dropping even softer. "You're not losing me," he said. "I'm right here." Emma felt her heartbeat thud painfully, and she looked away, unable to hold his gaze without feeling overwhelmed. Ethan stepped closer, slow and careful, then lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bed beside her. Keeping a small but meaningful distance, he exhaled slowly. "Emma," he said. "I need you to tell me something." She turned to him, her breath unsteady. "What?" she whispered. "Do you feel something for me?" He asked, not demanding, not pressuring, just asking with quiet honesty. "Not something you imagine, not something you fear, but something real." Her breath trembled, her fingers tightening around each other. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat, her ears, her hands. She wanted to hide, to run, to bury everything again. But the truth pulled her forward like a quiet force she couldn't fight anymore. She whispered, "Yes." The word escaped before she could stop it, and once it was out, she felt like the world exhaled with her. Ethan's eyes softened immediately, warmth spreading across his face like sunlight rising after a long night. He didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her hand. He simply let the truth settle between them like a fragile but beautiful beginning. Emma felt her cheeks warm as she continued in a shaky voice. "I tried to ignore it," she said. "I told myself it was just comfort or friendship or something temporary." She shook her head. "But every time you talk to me, every time you smile at me, every time you show up when I need someone, it gets harder to deny." Ethan breathed in deeply, the sound steady but full of emotion. "I felt something too," he said quietly. "But I didn't want to make you uncomfortable." She met his eyes, surprised. "You did." He nodded lightly. "I did," he admitted. "At first I didn't know what it was, then I tried to push it down, but the more I watched you try to handle everything alone, the more I wanted to be the one you could lean on." Emma's chest tightened, a mix of fear and tenderness washing through her. "So what do we do?" she whispered. "What happens now?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his voice calm. "We go slow," he said. "We don't rush, we don't force, we don't make big decisions tonight." He looked at her gently. "We just be honest with each other, that's the first step." Emma nodded slowly, relief and fear swirling together. "Okay?" she whispered. Silence settled between them. But this time it wasn't heavy or awkward, it was warm, thoughtful, full of possibilities. Ethan looked around the room, then back at her with a small smile. "You know," he said softly, "I didn't expect tonight to go like this." Emma let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Me neither," she said, her voice still soft but steadier now. Ethan's smile grew a little, his eyes warm. "But I'm glad it did." Emma looked at him, the words touching something deep inside her. "Me too," she whispered shyly. Another silence followed, but this one felt different, comfortable, calm, like a moment where two people sat on the edge of something new and didn't want to ruin it by speaking too loudly. Ethan rose from the bed slowly. "I should give you some space," he said quietly. "It's been a long night and we both need time to think." Emma nodded, though part of her didn't want him to leave. "Yeah," she whispered. "You're right." Ethan walked to the door, then paused, turning back toward her, his eyes softened again. "Emma," he said gently, "we'll talk tomorrow, okay?" She nodded again. "Okay," she whispered. He gave her a small, warm smile before stepping out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. The moment the door shut, Emma felt everything hit her at once, the weight of the night, the confessions, the emotions, the relief. She lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart still racing but no longer drowning her. She felt lighter, scared, hopeful, and confused all at once. Sleep didn't come fast, but it came eventually, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't fall asleep feeling alone. The next morning arrived quietly, sunlight slipping through her curtains like a gentle reminder that life still moved forward. Emma woke slowly, her chest warm and heavy with memories from the night before. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, feeling a nervous flutter in her stomach as she remembered Ethan's words. She stood, washed her face, and walked out of her room. Ethan was already in the kitchen making coffee, the smell filling the apartment with warmth. When he saw her, he smiled, a soft, calm smile that made her heart tremble again. "Morning," he said gently. "Morning," she whispered back. He handed her a mug, their fingers brushing for a second, and her breath caught. Ethan didn't rush anything. He didn't bring up last night immediately. He just let the morning settle around them softly, quietly, respectfully. After a few moments, he leaned against the counter and looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "So," he said softly, "can we talk now?" Emma nodded slowly. "Yeah," she whispered. "We should." Ethan took a careful breath. "I meant everything I said," he said gently. "I care about you, Emma, and I want to see where this goes." Emma's heart warmed, her voice barely above a breath. "I want that too." Ethan smiled, relief and warmth filling his eyes. "Then we'll take it step by step," he said. "No pressure, no rushing, just honesty." Emma nodded, her chest tightening in a good way, in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Okay?" she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, not touching her, Just close enough to make her feel seen, warm and safe. Whatever happens, he said softly, we'll face it together. Emma looked up into his eyes, her breath catching at the sincerity there, the kind that felt steady, lasting, real, and as she stood there in the soft morning light, holding her coffee, holding her feelings, holding the hope of something new, Emma realized that the night that broke her also brought her something unexpected. Something gentle, something strong, something worth trusting. It brought her Ethan. It brought her honesty. It brought her a beginning she never planned, but maybe the beginning she needed.